Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take complex, important research and really break it down, pulling out the key insights just for you. Our goal today is to give you a full picture, a comprehensive understanding of a really significant scientific paper, without you having to wade through all the dense academic text. We're diving into a paper from 2022. It's looking at something driving huge global change: biological invasions.
That's right. The paper is Biological Invasions as a Selective Filter Driving Behavioral Divergence. David G. Chapple is the lead author, along with his colleagues. And the core question they're asking is, well, it's rooted in evolutionary ecology. Does the whole process of invasion, getting moved somewhere, setting up shop, spreading out, does that process itself act like a strict filter? Does it actually pre-select for certain personality types, shaping which populations actually succeed in a new place?
And figuring this out is crucial, right? Because invasive species, they're not just like a minor annoyance. They're a major force driving biodiversity loss worldwide. They can really mess up ecosystems, sometimes push native species towards extinction, and the economic cost is just staggering, hundreds of billions globally every year. So if we can pin down the behaviors that help a species get through that invasion process, especially that first step, the transport, well, that gives us a much better predictive handle on things.
Okay, so let's unpack the mechanism they're testing first. Invasion isn't one single event. It's got stages. You've got the initial transport getting from A to B, then introduction, so being released, then establishment, actually surviving and breeding, and finally spread, moving into new areas. The selective filter hypothesis basically says each of these stages is a kind of bottleneck. Only individuals with the right stuff, maybe specific behaviors, can squeeze through.
Yeah, and this idea isn't totally out of the blue. Past research kind of hinted that certain behaviors, being more active, exploring a lot, boldness seemed to pop up in successful invaders, which makes sense, doesn't it? If you're a little critter, being nosy and exploratory might just make you more likely to, I don't know, crawl into a shipping crate or onto some luggage.
Exactly. The explorers, the risk takers, they're probably the ones most likely to become accidental stowaways in the first place. And then if they get dropped into some completely new, maybe chaotic place, having a bold personality might mean they actually find food and shelter quickly, instead of just hiding, paralyzed by fear.
So the team here, Chapel and colleagues, they weren't just looking for a simple link. They were testing two specific predictions that would really nail down this filter idea, comparing invaders to the original native populations. What were they expecting to see?
Okay, first prediction. A shift in the average behavior, the means. Pretty straightforward. If risk takers are being selected, then the invasive population, on average, should be way more exploratory, maybe bolder, more active than the population they came from. The second prediction is maybe even more telling evidence for a bottleneck. They predicted a reduction in the variation between individuals. Think about it. If the filter's really tight, it's basically weeding out all the shy, hesitant, inactive ones.
Yeah.
So your native population might have a whole spectrum of personalities.
Mostly a mix.
Yeah, from super cautious to really bold. But the invasive group, they should be much more uniform, all huddled around that successful high-risk behavioral type.
And the real strength of this study, how they tried to separate this filtering effect from just, random luck, what we call a founder effect. How do you tell selection apart from just chance?
Replication, that's the key. If an invasion is just random luck, a founder effect, then different populations invading different places should end up with kind of random sets of traits, right? Inconsistent. But if you see the exact same behavioral shifts, the same increase in the average risk-taking, the same drop in variation happening in multiple independent invasions, that consistency, that's the real clincher. It strongly suggests filtering, not just chance.
And to get that kind of robust replication, they needed the perfect test case, the right animal.
They found it in the delicate skink, Lamprophilus delicata. It's this small lizard, active during the day, native to eastern Australia. Funnily enough, where it's invasive, people often call it the plague skink. Not very flattering.
Oh.
But what makes it perfect for this study is its invasion history. It is remarkably the only lizard from Australia known to have successfully invaded overseas. And it hasn't just done it once, it's done it multiple times independently.
Which gave the researchers basically 3 natural experiments running in parallel, separated by space and time.
It's exactly right. So the study design compares native Aussie populations to these 3 separate invasive lineages. You've got Hawaii, established way back around 1905. Looks like they came from the Brisbane area. Then New Zealand, starting in the early 1960s, sourced from a place called Tenterfield. And the most recent one, Lord Howe Island, established in the 1980s, and those seem to have come from around Coffs Harbour.
Okay, and let's just underline the rigor here for you listening. They didn't just, like, look at genes. They actually measured the behavior of 520 individual lizards across 14 different populations. How do they actually measure something like boldness or exploration in a lizard?
They used standardized tests, behavioral assays, in a controlled lab setting. So for exploration, they looked at how much time a skink spent actively checking out a new barrier placed in its little arena. For activity, it was pretty simple. They just counted how many grid lines the lizard crossed on the floor over a set time. And boldness, they measured that using something called reemergence latency. Basically, they'd simulate a predator attack, like a shadow passing over, and then time how long the skinks stayed hidden before it decided to peek out again.
So shorter time hidden means more bold.
Exactly. A bolder lizard comes out faster.
And they added another layer in New Zealand, didn't they? Looking within that invasion.
They did, yeah. That was clever. They compared the older populations, the ones near the original introduction site, like Auckland, established back in the 60s. They compared those to the newer populations right out on the edges of the skink's current range, places like Whangarei and Edgecombe. This let them ask, was the selection just a one-off thing during that initial bottleneck, or is it still happening, still driving evolution as the skink spread across the country?
Okay, let's get to the results then. Did the evidence actually back up this selective filter idea across all three invasions? Hawaii, New Zealand, Lord Howe Island?
Yes, overwhelmingly, it did. The results lined up really consistently with those main predictions of the selective filter hypothesis.
Okay, break down that first prediction. The shift in average traits. The invaders are the risk takers, right?
That's what they found. Skinks from all three of those invasive regions, Hawaii, NZ, Lord Howe, showed a really substantial, statistically significant increase in exploratory behavior compared to the native populations they originally came from.
Wow, all three.
All three. And it wasn't just exploration. The New Zealand skinks also stood out as being significantly bolder and a bit more active than their native source population. And remember that fine-scale look within New Zealand. That confirmed it too. The populations on the newest, most recently colonized range edges, they showed the biggest differences in activity.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, it suggests the selection for being mobile, for taking risks, is actually continuing as the species spreads. It's not just an arrival phenomenon.
Okay, so we've got risk-prone invaders. Now, what about that key signature of the filter, the reduction in variation? This is where it gets really distinct from just random chance, you said.
This is the critical bit, yes. Skinks from all three independent invasive regions showed a substantial decrease among individual variation in their exploratory behavior.
Okay, hang on. Let's make sure we, and you listening, really get this. So in Australia, in the native range, you'd find a wide mix of personalities, shy ones, super explorers, ones in between.
Correct, a broad spectrum.
But if you go to Hawaii or New Zealand or Lord Howe Island, basically all the skinks there are clustered up at the high exploration, risk-prone end.
That's exactly it. The variety is dramatically reduced. It's like the filter sieved out the less exploratory ones, leaving this much more uniform group defined by that one successful trait, willingness to explore, to take risks. And they saw this reduction in variation for activity too, especially clearly in New Zealand. This homogeneity, this uniformity really points to that strong bottleneck effect during invasion.
And it seems like selection didn't just change the levels of traits, but maybe their relationships too. You mentioned something about a behavioral syndrome.
Right. So in the native Australian populations, they found what's called an activity exploration behavioral syndrome. Basically, that just means those two traits were linked. If a skink was highly active, it was usually also highly exploratory, and vice versa. The traits traveled together.
Okay.
But fascinatingly, this syndrome, this link, was disrupted or completely missing in all three of the invasive populations.
Why does breaking that link matter?
Well, it suggests that selection isn't just favoring a general go-getter type. It seems to be honing in very specifically, very intensely, on high exploration as perhaps the primary trait needed for that initial stowaway success. The invasion process itself seems strong enough to actually break apart the existing personality structure found back home.
Okay, so the changes in average behavior and the reduced variation really nailed down the selective filter idea. But you mentioned something novel, maybe even a bit contradictory, something about plasticity.
Yes, this was probably the most unexpected finding. So we've just established that the invasive populations are less variable between individuals. They're all pretty similar risk takers. Yet the study also found that lizards from all three invasive ranges were simultaneously more behaviorally plastic. which means they showed greater variation within a single individual over time. They showed more variation in their exploration, their activity, their boldness,
Yeah.
compared to their native ancestors.
Okay, that does sound a bit odd. How can they be so uniform as a group, all explorers, but individually they're more flexible, more changeable?
It seems counterintuitive at first, yeah.
Sure.
But this is the really interesting synthesis the paper puts forward. Plasticity, this within individual variation, is essentially an organism's ability to adjust its behavior on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
Dialing it up or down depending on whether things feel safe or suddenly dangerous. The invasion process seems to select for individuals who are not only highly exploratory, but are also really good at, well, improvising.
Ah, okay. So the filter lets through the risk takers, but maybe only the risk takers who also have this built-in flexibility, this plasticity, to handle the unpredictable nature of a brand new environment. It sort of acts like a safety net for them.
That seems to be the idea. This increased flexibility might be crucial for coping with all the new challenges and pressures. It lets them change their tactics quickly, adapt their decisions, which could be vital for the survival of those small, vulnerable founding groups. It's like you need the right personality to get through the door, high exploration, but you also need the flexibility to figure things out once you're inside high plasticity.
Right. So stepping back, the big picture conclusion here, based on seeing the same pattern across three separate independent invasions, it really points towards selective filtering happening before establishment, probably during that transport phase mostly. And it makes simple random chance founder effects look much less likely.
Definitely the strongest conclusion. Now, the authors, quite rightly, did consider other things that could happen after they arrive, post-establishment processes, like special sorting.
What's that exactly?
That's the idea that as a species spreads, the individuals that are naturally more active, more prone to risk-taking, tend to end up colonizing the very edge of the extending range, like the pioneers.
Okay, and that could explain why those newest populations in New Zealand were the most active, right?
It could certainly contribute, yeah, especially within New Zealand. But the authors argue it's probably not the main story for the whole pattern across all three invasions. Remember, even the original founding population in Auckland showed the behavioral shifts way back. And the way these skinks spread often involves humans accidentally moving them long distances. We call it jump dispersal.
Ah, like hitching a ride on landscaping supplies or something.
Exactly. It's not just a slow, steady march across the land. That human element makes simple spatial sorting less likely to be the only explanation for the consistent pattern everywhere.
What about another classic idea, the enemy release hypothesis? Maybe they're just bolder because they left their main predators behind in Australia.
They consider that too. But they point out that Hawaii, Lord Howe Island, New Zealand, these places aren't exactly enemy-free zones. They all have plenty of predators, both native birds and other introduced ones like Australian magpies and currawongs that definitely eat these skinks.
So not a paradise for them.
Far from it. So while they might escape some specific enemies, like certain parasites maybe, it doesn't seem like a general lack of predators is strong enough to explain why all three lineages shifted their behavior in such similar ways. The selective filtering during transport and initial establishment still looks like the most robust explanation overall.
Okay, so what are the real-world consequences then? If the invaders we're dealing with are essentially pre-selected for being risk-prone and flexible, how does that change the threat they pose?
Well, those traits, risk-taking, high exploration, plasticity, they're often linked to things like being better competitors, being quicker to find and use resources. This means these filtered invaders might be more likely to outcompete native species, disrupt food webs, maybe even alter predator-prey interactions more severely than, say, a randomly introduced group would.
And for biosecurity, for trying to prevent invasions, the message seems pretty clear. Focus on those transport pathways. We're unintentionally running a selection experiment, aren't we?
It really looks that way. We're creating conditions where the individuals most likely to survive the journey, to become stowaways, are precisely the ones with the behavioral toolkit, risk-taking, exploration, adaptability that makes them successful invaders if they arrive.
So monitoring those key trade routes, looking for potential stowaways becomes even more critical because we know the ones that make it that far are likely the riskiest.
Exactly. This study provides strong evidence connecting that transport survival stage directly to invasion potential through these behavioral traits.
All right, so to wrap up this deep dive, we've seen how biological invasion isn't just passive. It actively selects for delicate skinks that are more exploratory, much more uniform in that specific behavior, and maybe surprisingly, also more behaviorally flexible, more plastic.
Yeah, and the paper points clearly to what needs studying next. We need to really pinpoint when the selection is strongest. Is it mostly during the transit itself or maybe right after arrival? And crucially, is that increased plasticity we see an evolved adaptive trait that helps them invade? Or is it maybe just a temporary non-adaptive stress response to being in a totally new place? Getting that right is key for future predictions.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to chew on. If the simple act of being a stowaway can so effectively select for a specific high-risk personality in this little lizard, what other traits, behavioral or otherwise, might we be unknowingly selecting for through our massive global movement of species? Think about plants, microbes, pets, pests. That filter is always running. What else is it shaping?